You're listening to episode 77 of the Confident Writer podcast with Jane Pike. Hello, fabulous human. Thank you so much for joining me today in my little corner of podcast land. I wanted to talk about something that has relevance across many different spheres, I believe, but we are going to discuss it in the context of anxiety, simply because that was the question that was initially posed to me, and I think it's a really good one for many of us to be able to relate to, basically. So a couple of months back, I got tagged in a post in a group that I'm a part of, and it was around a concept that I refer to as, or an experience that I refer to as free-floating anxiety. So free-floating anxiety is that type of anxiety that kind of sneaks up on you, that you experience when there really is no valid reason as to why it's actually there. I know this has happened to me many times over, and certainly before I developed more integrated understandings of the nervous system, it was somewhat of a mystery to me as to why it kept happening. But it would creep in like a slow mist and consume me, and I would find myself in situations where I'm like, why do I feel like this? This is clearly ridiculous. Everything is fine, and yet here I am in this mode of feeling like I just want to escape. Going back to the post, the person in question, and I'm going to paraphrase what it was that they asked me, said that they were dealing with a ball of anxiety that never seemed to go away. And what's more, there didn't appear to be any reason that they could observe in their writing or their horsing life that gave their anxiety validity. It can be really bewildering and really frustrating. Like there's a fragmented piece of emotion that's kind of circling and swirling through our orbit, and we're never quite sure when it's going to land and when it's going to take off, and yet it seems to be perpetually influencing our responses and our interactions. The key piece that I want to get to before we launch into the whys and the hows of why this might be the case is that when we do lack context and understanding for what it is that's happening, what it is that's going on, it's very easy to internalize this and interpret it as some kind of personal weakness or flaw. And I see this time and time again. This is the liberation of understanding, and why at the beginning of Joyride, my membership program, I go to such pains to actually explain the nervous system and where it is we're sitting and why that is the case, because you're then able to separate different pieces out that you might have been clinging to quite hard as like part of your personality or part of your identity. And instead you can start to understand those as mercurial experiences that come and go with the weather, basically. I also don't want to attribute any one fixed answer to this situation, because all of us here who are tuning in right now have a very personal experience that has brought them to the place that you're in. You know, all of us have had our own histories, our own circumstances. We are all messy and imperfect and fabulous and robust in our own way. And so when we have individual conversations, it's much easier to kind of identify what it is that is going on for you and to figure out the best resources for you to give you the best support in your situation. And so as we have this conversation now, I want to frame it by saying this is more generally or broadly speaking. And while no one should be forced into a box of general or broad, it does mean that there are principles within this that do apply to many of us. And these are the three main ones that I see come up that give understanding and give reason to some of these experiences of what we might see as free-floating anxiety. So the first is more intuitive and more instinctual. And if we think about this in terms of three possibilities for why this is occurring, possibility one is that this free-floating anxiety, this ball of anxiety which you can't quite seem to place, could be a communication of your body asking you to pay attention, like an intuitive messenger tapping on the door and saying, hello, there's something here that you need to notice and prepare for. What's really interesting to me and what's really fascinating to me is that we have been trained out of trusting ourselves, and we've been really trained out of trusting our own body and unconscious processes. That's something that we don't really like doing if we're given the choice. And the irony of this is, and I think the beauty of this as well, once you can start to see things from a slightly different perspective, is that your body and your mind are never working against you. They are always working in your best interest with the resources and with the understandings and awarenesses that they have available to them at the time. Now, what can happen in parallel to that is that life happens. Perhaps we get sick. Perhaps we feel like our bodies let us down in some way. Perhaps there's been a situation in our past which hasn't been great, like abuse or so on and so forth. And there's been a gradual disconnection from our body where we feel like it's not a safe place to be. It's not a trustworthy place to be. And similarly to that, it doesn't have to be so much of a big event or a big trauma. It can be a series of little events or little stresses that have gradually added up to more discombobulation or more dysregulation that again has had the same effect, even though the underlying reasons as to why we've got to that place might be different from someone else. Consequently, when we get into a position where we are no longer trusting of our unconscious mind and of our body, we become also increasingly distanced from our sixth sense or our intuitive judgments in relation to so many different situations, in relation to relationships, the world around us, how we're navigating our way through, especially when we identify strongly with anxiety. With many people that I've had conversations with around this topic, those who have a strong stranglehold on anxiety as like a part of them, as like part of their personality, start to view any indication of concern as something that is a reflection of their inability to be able to hold strength in a situation. And what I think it's really important to start to discern between is anxiety that is a product of something that could be related to traumatic stress, for instance, unmetabolized stress cycles, nervous system dysregulation, and so on and so forth, and a very real communication of your body that there is something that you need to pay attention to. This is the discernment that is lost when we start to bring anxiety too close to us in terms of this is part of who I am. Anxiety is mercurial. It is an emotional experience like any other, and it ebbs and flows. And if it is more a part of our experience than something else, then that is telling us that something needs to be addressed or taken care of. But it still doesn't mean it's a part of you in terms of like your core being. So when I think about this first possibility, I think that this is something that we need to hold in our mind. Is the consistency of this feeling because I'm just not paying attention to something that I really need to pay attention to. My safety is something that isn't working for me, a need that's not being met, and if I was to actually consider that, would that feeling then be able to move through? Would I be able to process that in a different way? Because the reason that it was present has now been paid attention to. The way that I think of gut signals, or like that walkie-talkie system between your gut and your brain, is that if you are having an intuitive response to something, or there is a natural protective mechanism of your body that's feeling into your environment or a situation and saying, you need to pay attention, this is something that you need to pay attention to, that message is not going to go away simply by you not paying attention to it. If anything, it's going to get louder. And so we do want to ask ourselves, is the consistency of this sensation, is the consistency of what I'm feeling now related to that? Is it because I'm having this, this active connection between the walkie-talkie system in my gut? Is that message, am I not picking it up? And is the signal required to get louder simply because I'm not paying attention in the way that I need to? So that's the first possibility. The second possibility is that the anxiety could be a symptom of nervous system dysregulation and discombobulation. So that means that over time, for whatever reason, and it can be related to bigger events that are really easily identifiable to us. And in those situations, like an accident or an injury, for instance, you might be able to really identify like a before and after story, where if someone comes to me in a state where they have a really obvious event which has changed the way that they're functioning in the world, it will be like, before the event, I was like this, and after the event, I was like this. And the after usually relates to a decrease in resilience, an increase in hypervigilance and feelings of kind of being out of control and so on and so forth. And so there's this dividing line that has occurred in the narrative of their life that is causing them to respond differently afterwards. That doesn't have to be the case, right? In that instance, the baseline has shifted, and so the threshold of capacity, their window of capacity, has reduced to the point where the amount of activation and energy that they can handle in the system has become drastically reduced. And so what we have in those instances is a very quick trajectory towards survival response, towards flight, fight, shutdown, and so on and so forth. The other reason that can play out in the same way is that we just have a series of repetitive smaller stresses where the stress cycles aren't being completed, where there's incomplete cycles of activation in the body. And again, that leads to the same situation where our window of capacity is reduced, so we don't have as much to play with. We don't have as much of a threshold that we can contain experiences in. You know, the emotion and energy that we can usually hold within the edges of our skin becomes much more finite, and we find ourselves again moving into survival responses that are, I don't want to say inappropriate, but usually inappropriate for the situation that we find ourselves in, right? So when we're in that circumstance, when we're inside that possibility, it just means that our baseline has shifted, and the anxiety that you're experiencing is really a reflection of where it is your nervous system is sitting. So your thoughts are mirroring where your nervous system is sitting. The third possibility, and I think this is one that is more common than perhaps we realize, there's definitely a huge movement towards understanding the effect of trauma on the body and really recognizing why body-based or somatic practices are so important. And I'm super grateful for that, and I think I'm a part of that as well. And what we're going to talk about now when it comes to really understanding traumatic stress will also illuminate, I hope, why accessing things at the level of the mind is sometimes ineffectual, right? So the third possibility that we're going to break down off the back of this free-floating anxiety question is that it's a result of traumatic stress. And this also ties closely into what it is that we were talking about in the previous option. So a combination of incomplete stress cycles, seemingly random spikes in emotion, and that leaves you in the midst of an apparently disconnected and decontextualized experience. Where I want to dive into with this, though, is on a slightly different level and understand to lead us towards understanding the nature of conscious memory compared to unconscious memory. Now, the part of our brain that is responsible for conscious memory or explicit memory is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is essentially what timestamps our experiences. So if I'm sitting here talking to you and you were to ask me, oh, what did you do yesterday? Or what did you have for dinner? Or what was your birthday like last year? Actually, I probably can't tell you that, but you know what I mean. Referencing something in the past, it is the hippocampus that goes back through the library of those experiences and allows me to consciously elucidate an answer for you. Yeah. So I have a conscious memory file that allows me to pretty quickly bring that to the forefront of my mind and explain to you what I was doing and where I was at certain times and situations in the past. Now, when we think of unconscious memory, we're talking more about the amygdala, and that's also related to fear-based responses and more survival-based responses of the nervous system. It's also related to implicit memory, so body-based understandings and memories that exist separate to the conscious mind. Now, the thing to understand about the formation of implicit and explicit memory, or conscious and unconscious memory, is that the stress hormones that are released when we're under pressure actually suppress the activity of the hippocampus. They suppress the ability of the hippocampus to make conscious memories, which means that our body, or our unconscious memory machine, the amygdala, is busy out there making memories. It doesn't have the same the hormones don't have the same suppressive effect on the amygdala as they do on the hippocampus. And so our unconscious memories are being stored at a thick and fast rate, but that is existing separate to our conscious awareness. What this means is if we go into a situation where we have a body-based experience, where we have our body has a remembering that causes certain sensations, certain feelings, certain responses to be activated, that is separate from the conscious mind, what is important to understand, or the context that this provides us with, is that makes sense when we understand the workings of the brain and how it is we form memory. If you don't understand that in situations of high stress, your conscious brain is not actually in a place to make memories, then it allows you to recognize that, this is why when I'm in positions where my body is remembering things that doesn't seem to make sense to me, or I don't completely get, that is because it is existing and has been formed outside of your conscious awareness. And so trying to create reparation, trying to create healing by working at the level of the conscious mind is going to be wholly ineffectual in these cases. Not completely. We do have to provide some reframes to our emotional brain in this case, but we can see that if we have a memory storage that is happening at the level of the unconscious that is separate to our ability to consciously recognize that, then we need to be accessing things in a different way. We need to be accessing things at the level of the body and really working at that level in order for some kind of reparation to be really effective. To me, those understandings are so key. And this conversation also relates directly to the previous episode that I recorded, which was all around how we invest in sensation and the connections between sensation and the emotional brain. So then if we think about that, if I was to bring that forward, if I was to bring that learning forward and to say, okay, so let's say we are in possibility 3 now, where our free-floating anxiety is actually the product of traumatic stress. I'm in a situation out there with my horse and my horse appears fine. I'm feeling incredibly anxious and incredibly overwhelmed. And what has happened there is when I have a sensation attached to that, that sensation has become so familiar or so practiced to me that I now have a narrative or a story that I attach to it. So consider this. I have that experience of anxiety. What is the first thing that happens when I have an experience that is separate or exists outside my conscious awareness? I try very hard to make sense of it. I want to attach a meaning to it. I want to understand it. The conscious mind does not do well with not understanding. As humans, we are meaning-making machines. And so what we do then, when we have a sensation that doesn't make sense, is that we search back through our mental files for a situation that was similar to or kind of the same as this, so that we can attach a story to it and make sense of it that way. But that's not actually an accurate representation of what's going on. It's just that we have attributed a situation from the past that is kind of most like this to the sensation that we're feeling now. And what that does is now links that sensation to our emotional brain. And then if we understand that every thought that we have, every emotion that we feel has a motor pattern attached to it, then there's a situation that we start to play out that leads us once again into that Groundhog Day situation. The other side of it is that the unconscious brain, when it's making memories about situations, does so really indiscriminately, meaning that it's not interested in what is actually vital in this situation for us to know, and it can store information that's essentially superfluous to what has actually happened but can get in our way in the future. For instance, say I have an accident out there riding, and at that particular time, there was like a red pole lying on the ground. And my conscious mind might not have registered the red pole. It might have nothing to do with what it is that's going on. But my unconscious mind, being the genius that it is, simply absorbs everything that's in my environment. And sometime in the future, when I'm in a place that is completely removed from the accident, I'm completely fine. I might not be anywhere near a horse, but I could see a red pole on the ground, and that would activate the body-based memory. That would activate the unconscious memory. So there I am, finding myself in this experience where I'm like, why do I feel like this? This is ridiculous. And again, if you lack context, that's where you start to internalize that experience. You really map in the sensation, which then again creates that linking to the emotional brain, the story, so on and so forth, and we find ourselves kind of spinning around. It's fascinating and liberating and so vital, I think, these understandings, because without them, we continually and perpetually beat up on ourselves. And it's very easy to get into a situation where you feel a sense of hopelessness. And that's the opposite of what it is that I want to have you experience. I've been there. I know that feeling. I think all of us have had a taster of some degree or another to what that feels like. And the thing is that really gaining these understandings is the first step to pulling yourself out of that hole, and to being able to understand, or to be able to understand rather, these things are figure outable. You know, this is something that is understandable, it's workable, but we just need to be in a position where we have the right kind of support around us and the right kind of understandings around us to say, oh, we get what's going on. Yeah, we can explain that to you on a physiological level as to what's happening right now. You know, you don't have to think positive. You don't have to visualizing your way out of this is perhaps not going to be the most effective option, because when we understand what really is happening, we need ways of metabolizing the energy that's presenting. We need skills that allow us to not buy into the sensation, so we can start to decouple those associations between the body and what it's presenting and the emotional brain's narrative that it likes to attach to it. And slowly, like I'm always saying, at the speed of a slow-flying bird, we move in a different direction to where we notice that these cycles are starting to find completion and our body is starting to find an increased sense of resilience and robustness. So I hope that if you had a resonance, or it kind of landed with you at the start of like, yes, that is me, I know what she's talking about, I am the free-floating anxiety, then one of these possibilities lands for you, and that there is a liberation in the recognition of what it is that's going on, and that you're not alone. You're so not alone in that situation. What I do, what I'm passionate about, the work that I do in Joyride really centers around this, all three possibilities and so much more. So if you're like, oh, how do I take this further? How do I know, what it is that I need? Then I really encourage you to jump over and have a look at my membership program. It's confidentrider.online/Joyride. If you're wondering if it's for you, if you're like, I'm not sure, is that really my bag? Am I a good fit for that? Then please feel free to get in touch as well, because I would be more than happy to let you know if what I offer would be workable for you, because obviously I want everyone to have a successful experience. So that's it from me today. I hope that was helpful. Once again, thank you so much for hanging out. It has been an absolute pleasure. Have a fabulous rest of your day, and I'm looking forward to talking again with you soon.